Hey guys, and welcome back to the Layah Heilpern Show. Today we're actually talking about one of my favorite topics. We're talking about privacy coins and how that's going to look in the future. But before we jump in, this is powered by Icon Plus. So as usual, I'm going to do a really quick news announcement. So Icon has launched its next level DeFi money market. It's called Finance, and it actually allows DeFi users and yield farmers, and also really interesting non-crypto users to earn extra yield. So that's really exciting. And this means open finance for everyone. I also want to say thank you to BlockFi because they are my sponsors. I use them. I earn 8.6% interest on my USDC. So that's really cool. So I'm going to put a link to the website for you guys where you can actually grab $25 if you sign up. I'll put that in the description. I'll put it in the comment section. So just go for it and grab your $25. So like I said, today we have a very exciting guest. We have somebody with quite an interesting name. It is, of course, Fluffy Pony. How you doing, Riccardo?
I'm great, and thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. I have to say that your name is incredibly interesting, and you must get this all the time. So before we talk about Monero, which by the way, I'm a huge fan of, I want to just get the basics behind the name Fluffy Pony.
Sure. So contrary to popular belief, it's not actually my real name. It is a nickname that was given to me by two girls I worked with, like 2 decades ago, who called themselves Fluffy Puppy and Fluffy Bunny. And they gave me the moniker Fluffy Pony, and I thought at one point that I could not use it, that I could walk away from it, but they just didn't let me. They just kept using it, and I was like, well, that's it. I am henceforth known as Fluffy Pony.
I think it's good. I think it's different. It's unique, and I think it's great for the branding and everything. I think it's brilliant.
Well, I mean, it's one thing that I have enjoyed about it is it has been quite disarming to people. They're not sure whether to take me seriously, and that's great because I don't, typically I don't want to be taken seriously. I enjoy having fun and joking around, and I feel like if I was like Professor, Dr. Mr. Spagni, Inc., or whatever, that it just wouldn't be true to who I am.
It's true, actually, because when we first connected, somebody sort of tagged you in something that I posted, and then immediately Fluffy Pony. It just sounds so endearing. I wasn't just like, oh, shall I be careful with this one? It's super endearing.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So you are part of the core Monero team, is that right?
Yes, so I was the lead maintainer on Monero for a very long time. Last year I stepped back. I still am a maintainer. I'm still heavily involved in the community, but I sort of stepped back from a lot of the duties, largely to give other people an opportunity to step in, and not to be a bus factor. I didn't want to be like that thing that could be taken out that would disrupt things. And I didn't want people looking up to me for news or information or any indication about what's going to happen with Monero. Monero it's something that's driven by a collective, and I think that true to form, it's now even more driven by a collective, and there's no single hinge in it, or like pin that you can pull out and everything collapses.
Right, and I want to get to that because that kind of links to Bitcoin in some way. So we'll get to that. But what are you up to then at the moment if you're not, if you've taken a step back?
Sure. So, apart from being involved in several boating accidents in which I lost all of my cryptocurrency, sadly, don't go boating with private keys. I have actually.
When was this? When was this?
Oh, have you not heard about the many boating accidents?
But what do you mean many? I've heard once. You're telling me there's more?
Oh, there has to be. Anytime that I might have accumulated cryptocurrency of any sort, be it Bitcoin or other, I will definitely have successively had a boating accident.
Oh my gosh.
One of those things, and I'm not the only person. Many people have had boating accidents with their private keys on them. Sadly, their private keys are now forever lost, bottom of the ocean.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's crazy. Yeah. So it's happened multiple times to you?
Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, I always bring my
Damn.
private keys on boats with me.
Oh my God, are you not gonna not do that next time? Like, are you not, or is this just something you still do?
I mean, like, I think it's just good form to bring your private keys with you when you know
Yes.
there's a high risk of a boating accident, And, and then it's gone. Then it's gone forever, and it's a tax write-off, which is like so sad.
Damn, I'm really sorry to hear about that. That sucks.
It's
That really
crazy.
sucks.
I'm sad as well. I cry myself to sleep many nights thinking about all of the private keys at the bottom of the ocean.
So
And
other
many and
than,
lakes. You can lose private keys on lakes as well.
yeah, well, there you go. So other than losing private keys and leaving them at the bottom of lakes and oceans, what on earth are you up to?
Well, the other thing that I'm working on is Tari, which is a decentralized assets protocol that we're building on top of Monero, or as
Mhm.
a side chain on Monero. And we sort of view the world of the future as being very assets focused. I mean, it already is. Like kids play Fortnite and they're obsessed with like their V-Bucks and their skins and other Fortnite things. You can tell I've never played Fortnite in my life.
Me
You
neither.
know, and so they already live in a world. We already live in a world where digital assets are sort of pretty common, but they're largely enclosed behind walled gardens. And a classic example of this, of course, is like airline loyalty points. Back when we used to be able to travel, then we used to collect these things called airline loyalty points. And
Back when we used to be able to travel, yeah.
back in the
In the
day,
olden days, yeah, the olden
yeah, in the
days.
olden days when air
Uh-huh.
travel was a thing before the
Yeah.
pandemic, and we did everything virtually. But airline loyalty points, if you have like tons of Emirates loyalty points, you can spend them on Emirates flights, and that's it. And there's like this weird secondary market that's come to exist with some loyalty point
Yeah.
systems where you can go on like whatever eBay and buy someone else's loyalty points, because like you might be 50 loyalty points short of that flight upgrade or whatever. So what we're sort of imagining or envisioning a world where those systems become a little bit more open, where we can use decentralized or distributed technology to try and break down those walls, where Emirates shouldn't care how you acquired your points, or if you no longer want them and you want to sell them. And they will. It might mean that they need to think a little bit more carefully about the distribution mechanism, but ultimately, it's great for them because they're able to still use the points like get new people and acquire new flyers, and those people are able to go and like turn those points into cash. And it applies to a whole bunch of other things, tickets, and of course NFTs, which are now all the
Mm-hmm.
rage. 4 or 5 minutes before they explode and then no one cares anymore. But it's definitely a space that we're deeply interested in, and a space that we think has got a long future ahead of it.
And I think Monero is a really interesting one, because people are very sensitive when we talk about different cryptos. I think it often has quite religious undertones, honestly. When people have, seriously, people are
You're
very
not wrong.
passionate.
I
I'm
totally
not
agree.
wrong. I'm right,
You're
right? So
spot
like,
on. You are spot on. It is so close to religious fundamentalism,
of course.
and it's to the point where it's embarrassing, actually. Like the it's not even tribalism. It is borderline religious fundamentalism. And if you take a look at stuff like BSV, where Craig Wright sort of fashions himself as a god who
Mm-hmm.
wrote the white paper, and now the hallowed white paper that everyone must follow, it's just crazy. It turns it into almost like a cult. And
Yeah,
I think it's not a good look. It's a technology. It's not a we
yeah.
shouldn't turn it into this weird like pseudo religious cult.
No, I'm totally with you. And the reason I bring it up is because it's really interesting to see how people actually, even Bitcoin maximalists, will take an interest in Monero. So I kind of wanted to get your opinion on that and sort of understand, what is it about Monero that actually spikes the interest of Bitcoin maximalists?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think part of it is that Monero is interesting from a privacy perspective, and a lot of Bitcoiners do care about privacy. I also think it's interesting because it's not like this cheap shot at Bitcoin where you click the fork button on GitHub, change some things, and go, oh look, I created a new cryptocurrency. It's a totally separate code base to Bitcoin, so from that perspective, it's interesting too. And I think that there's a lot of what's really interesting from a design perspective with Monero, and when I say design, I mean like programmatic and architectural design, is you can see the people that created CryptoNote and Monero's code base. They looked at what Bitcoin had done and a lot of the design decisions there, and they were inspired by it. And they were like, this is a good design decision. Let's take that and use it. Whereas a lot of other cryptocurrencies have been created over the past, sort of 5-ish years or so, have gone like, well, Bitcoin does it this way. Let's do something completely different for no reason other than we don't want to do things the Bitcoin way, which is, it's a little bit crazy to me because like Bitcoin is not only the OG, but like it's withstood the tests and attacks over the past decade. And for that alone, we should be looking at it inspirationally if we're designing a new system.
Right, and you're referring to proof of work versus proof of stake, right? Because Monero is proof of work.
That's one thing, absolutely. Yeah, proof of work and versus proof of stake is one aspect. Even other things, like Ethereum rewarding blocks that are mined that are not successfully mined, so orphan blocks. That whole system, that the game theory around that is so outside of like the game theory that we know and understand with Bitcoin. Other things like Ethereum and others opting to use account balances that update versus Bitcoin's and Monero's transaction outputs. They're design decisions, but like there's a very real reason why why Satoshi made those design decisions in the first place. And a decade later, those design decisions just should be reinforced as being valuable. And I guess it's a little bit of like a not invented yet syndrome that I see in the industry. Like we can't do things the Bitcoin way because, like, heaven forbid we even acknowledge that Bitcoin exists. That would be bad. We need to do things as differently as possible, which is weird.
Right. So I think it's also kind of like maybe also because Bitcoin is Bitcoin. So in some ways it's kind of hard to compete with. So don't try and compete with it. Try and do something different. I think that might be also something going on there.
100%.
Yeah, but also there are a lot of other privacy coins out there, Zcoin, Zcash, whatever it is. So from a Monero perspective, obviously you're far more bullish on Monero and so on. So why would you prefer Monero to things like Zcoin, Zcash? How would you sort of weigh them up against each other?
That's a great question. So the way I see it is it really comes down to two things. When you're comparing different privacy enhancing technologies, and by the way, this doesn't only apply to comparing privacy enhancing cryptocurrencies. You can take the same thing and you can apply it to comparing privacy enhancing routing like Tor and I2P and Freenet and others. So the two principles I look at is firstly, is privacy the default? Now, with any system, you can opt out, and that's true of Monero as well. So if you make a Monero transaction, you're like, ooh, look at my cool Monero transaction. It's so private. And you go post the details on Facebook, well, it's no longer private. Congratulations. So there's no prevention or no way from a technological perspective to prevent people from opting out of the privacy system. But if it's the default, it means that you're at least protected for the most part, unless you go and do something stupid like post your transaction details on Facebook. So default privacy is a very, very critical element. The second element that I look at, which I think is very important, is how big is the pool of privacy? How big is the privacy set? So as an example, you can imagine, and we see it in the movies all the time, someone's after the spy, and he's running through a marketplace, and he grabs a hat and he grabs a jacket, and he disappears into the crowd. Right. Now you can imagine if he disappears into the crowd, but the crowd is only like 4 people, the bad guys, the Russian gangsters or whatever, are going to come around the corner, and they're going to be like, there he is, and then they'll shoot at him because like it's easy to see. Whereas if he disappears into a crowd of like 3,000 people, well, they run around the corner and they're like, let's go drink vodka. And I think that
Yes.
that's really important, you know. So default privacy and how big is the crowd you're getting lost in. And on those two, Monero currently is king. That doesn't mean it's going to be king forever. It doesn't mean that it's
Okay.
always going to be the dominant privacy enhancing technology in the financial space, but it is right now. And for that alone, I think it's gotten a fair amount of attention.
So I think, okay, so firstly, love the analogy. It reminds me of an analogy that I heard. I think it was Ruben, the founder, I think, of Zcoin. I might be mixing that up, but I think it's right. So
Yeah,
he sort of
Ruben,
said
yeah,
to
he's
me,
great.
yeah,
Love him.
Ruben, yeah. So he's brilliant. So he gave me a really cool analogy, and it was something like, so footsteps on a beach, basically. So sometimes you just create more footsteps, and then sometimes you just completely get the waves to wash the footsteps away. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, nice and simple. I get that. So I also want to ask you then, what are your thoughts? Firstly, if we look at things like mass adoption, do you think Monero can scale? Number one, I'll ask that first. Do you think Monero can scale?
Yeah, so Monero has some interesting scaling technology already. Sometimes simple things like it's got a dynamic block size limit. So as demand for block space grows, Monero's like block size limiter increases. And it's got other things like bulletproofs, which has massively reduced the size of Monero transactions. So can it scale? Yes. I mean, it scales very differently to Bitcoin. But you know, there's a certain amount of pruning that can be done to reduce the blockchain storage. There's dynamic limiters and stuff like that, which enhances the scale. But ultimately, I think that there's an upper bound for both Bitcoin and Monero and other blockchain systems when it comes to scaling on chain, and how where that upper bound lives, I think is very, you know, it's not sort of like you can't increase it massively. Ultimately, it's always going to be painful to have all of these thousands of computers around the world all storing the same data and all coming to consensus on it, which is why layer 2 systems like Lightning and others are so interesting to me.
So talking about scalability, there's sort of no point to talk about scalability unless we think that we could actually see mass adoption of privacy coins. So the thing with privacy coins is that at the end of the day, governments, for whatever reason, like to know what you're doing with your money, where your money is, whether it's for tax reasons, whatever it is. So we often wonder whether cryptocurrencies will see mass adoption, whether cryptocurrencies will eventually, or maybe they'll be banned. But for me, I sort of think, okay, well, if anything gets banned, it's going to be privacy coins. And I'm a huge fan of privacy coins, but I do think that if anything gets banned, it will be privacy coins. So what do you think? Do you think that there's a chance that, you know, you put in all this hard work, but eventually it comes down to the fact that governments don't allow privacy coins?
That's a great question. So I'm of the opinion that privacy is not actually like something that governments necessarily don't want, because
Okay.
at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that governments do and corporations do which they wouldn't want exposed. And I'll give you a classic example of this. There's a lot of government stuff that is, you know, out there in the open, but anything that they do that is clandestine, like military action, and specific parts of the military, they wouldn't want that to be revealed by being forced to use a transparent system. Same
But I
goes for
want to just jump
corporations.
in. I want to just
Sure.
jump in though, because don't you think that, you know, it's often one rule for them and a different rule for everyone else? So just so they could get away essentially, because, you know, whatever the government do, they've already been accused of doing so many horrendous things, you know, even the British government in terms of selling arms to different countries or whatever. But we as the individual, you know, basic person, we don't know. Even though they're not using privacy coins, we still don't know. So, you know, they could do what they wanted for them, but for us, they'd ban it.
100%. So the way maybe a good way to look at it is the so-called military grade encryption. That you sometimes hear that term in movies. It's like, oh, we can't crack this message. It's got military grade encryption. You know,
Okay.
like what does that even mean? Because quite frankly, WhatsApp has military grade encryption. If we really want to get down to it, like, you know, the encryption that is available today in open source projects and products, and in systems like iMessage and WhatsApp, and I'm not even talking about things like Wire and Signal, just normal messaging systems that people use, is pretty legit and incredibly powerful, and has been very well designed and reviewed by renowned cryptographers and researchers. And so the same goes for the financial systems. You know, I mean, you can imagine if private finances are no longer available, if cash is no longer available, then there are certain clandestine activities that the military might want to do, like paying an informant, that they will no longer be able to do. If cash doesn't exist, then law enforcement can't pay confidential informants, and that's a big deal. So I do think that even from a government perspective, there is some degree of privacy that they want. And absolutely, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that they don't generally not want privacy. They generally want to, be able to control citizens and so on, because that is the natural state that regulation tends to, right? It starts off with like, everything must be fair and democratic, and then it tends towards control, because it's like a parent, right? A parent with an unruly child. When that child is young and it's a baby and it's all goo-goo, then oh, it's so cute. Oh, it did this naughty thing. It's just a naughty little child. And when the child is older and totally unruly and throwing a tantrum in the store, well, then the parent starts to get a little bit more manic and starts to get a little bit more stern, and that's what's tended to happen. And frankly, I think that just speaks to, in general, it's like politics is something that I avoid with great disdain.
Okay, I won't ask you about the election. Then I won't ask you.
No, I think that we've demonstrated over the past several thousand years that we're pretty bad at governing ourselves. It doesn't matter. We've tried all sorts of forms of government, and we've just proven that we're just not good at it.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that there hasn't really been a system of government that we can look at and be like, well, that one's really worked. Like this one has really there's been no abuse of power. There's been, the citizens are ecstatic with their lot in life. There's no one poor. There's no one hungry. Whether it is a monarchy or a democracy, or even the sort of more centralized forms of government, like ultimately we're just not very good at it. And I think if we acknowledge that, then we can maybe become a little bit more self-sufficient. And that's really where cryptocurrencies are useful, because they allow a little bit more self-sufficiency. They allow a little bit more self-sovereignty. They allow you to rely on controlling your own finances, instead of going, oh, well, let's hope that the bank can bail me out. Let's hope that the government can bail me out if things go wrong. And I think that's that sort of move towards self-reliance is what has sparked a lot of cryptocurrency development. It's what sparked, it at least seems to be what sparked Satoshi's development of Bitcoin.
So I have to ask you this. I actually wasn't planning on asking this, but here we are. So for me, crypto, Bitcoin is inherently political for exactly what you've just said. So there's this idea that Bitcoin is apolitical, but in my opinion, that is a utopian delusion. And I think we kind of like the idea that we're like, we are opting out of the system. Bitcoin is for everyone and anyone, and all this stuff. But it's exactly what you just said. So it's taking personal responsibility. It's being sovereign over your own assets. And really, it's less government. Like you said, we're not very good at governing ourselves. So let's govern ourselves on an individual level. And I think that is inherently political. Given if you look at the political spectrum, generally you find people who are. It's very difficult to. Terms have been hijacked, so it's quite difficult to sort of explain it. Yeah, I was going to say, if you're more, let's call words like libertarian. If you're more libertarian, then those are your political ideologies, right? It's kind of just like less government intervention and personal responsibility. So I just inherently think that it's political. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think that maybe based on a lot of the conversations I've been having, or that I've had over the past, nearly a decade with people in the space, I get the sense that, for the most part, what people want is to be left alone.
Yes.
And they will move to another country in order to be left alone. And that to me is fascinating, because it just shows you that they're feeling like their space is being encroached on, that there's regulatory overreach. And the same goes for companies, by the way. This is not just an individual thing. I know of plenty of companies that have either gone and moved out of a particular country. And this is certainly not like a European or a US thing. It's all sorts of countries.
Mm-hmm.
I know of companies where when they're founding, there's this discussion about where should we incorporate.
Yes,
and they decide where to incorporate on the basis of where can we be where we'll be left alone. It's like, it's so crazy to think that that's the world we live in. And yet I think it's also nice that we do have the freedom to be able to do that. I mean, you can start a company, open a bank account in a country you've never even traveled to. And you just ship some documents to them with wet signatures on and do everything else online. And there we go. You have a company in Estonia, with a bank account.
But wait, I have a question. But in terms of having a company in Estonia, don't you have to have an address or something to register under? Or am I being...
Yeah, and there are companies that will do little proxy offices for you, no problem. And they'll run mailboxes for physical mail, no problem. They will even have someone staff the phone to pick up the phone and answer in Estonian and English.
Is this legal? This is legal?
Yeah, totally legal. Totally legal.
Absolutely. We have to chat. We've got to have a chat after this. I've got some ideas.
There is no illegality with owning a company in another country. I mean, there might be tax implications domestically for you if you do that, but that's a separate issue. So yeah, I mean, and there are lots of companies that do this. I mean, you think about Apple, for example. When Apple goes into a new country, they don't necessarily go, well, we're going to set up Apple in this country and it's going to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Apple Inc. There's all sorts of clever things that they do, but that they sometimes have to do because they don't necessarily want to have Apple Inc. Owning the China, the entity in China, and so on. So there's all sorts of things that typically in the past have only been available to large corporations, and over the past, I would say, the past decade or so, especially post the Panama Papers, it's become a lot easier to do that and cheaper for individuals. So, I mean, it's this is the world that we live in now, and it's great because it's created a world of regulatory arbitrage. You'd want to set up a company, you don't want to set it up in the country you live in, no problem. Set it up over there. You don't like the place that you live in, you don't like the laws and whatever, no problem. You can uproot your entire family and move to another country.
It's true. I feel that way about the UK. I can't even lie. Taxes, it's very difficult to be involved in crypto in the UK. There's a lot of regulatory issues. Only now are we seeing, and I say only now, 10 years down the line or whatever, but still only now we're seeing different companies actually being available in the UK. Like crypto.com was only available, you can only really hold pounds and send it to your sterling bank account. Only I think it was only maybe June this year that became available, which is insane. Gemini, for example, they've only recently fully opened in the UK like they have in the US. So a lot of different regulatory issues there. But yeah, I mean,
Revolut's another great example of that. Where if you have a Revolut account, great, you can buy Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple and whatever, but you can't send it out your wallet as Bitcoin.
God,
you have to convert it back to pounds. Okay, cool. So you get price exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's so ridiculous. But I think with Revolut, I think they're one of those companies which are taking their time with things, and they're sort of doing it in a sensible way. I think they announced actually last week that you can now do recurring buys, which is super cool. Recurring buys in crypto. So that's great, except you don't really have a wallet to send, which really bugs me.
It's just price exposure, but still, I like that the fact that Revolut. I mean, Revolut's obviously, or at least I hope they're holding the the crypto that you buy in the back end somewhere, and you're getting actual price exposure and not pretend price exposure. But it is nice. I mean, like within the Revolut app, you could be a trader, you know, small trader, but still, it's cool that exists, and that it is, you know, I mean, to sign up on Revolut is like a 5-second thing. It's amazing.
Yeah, my thing with Revolut is, so I love just to move around. I don't really like to stay in one country. I love just to move and explore the world, basically. So I've just fell in love with Revolut from a fiat perspective, actually, just because you get the spot rates. You don't have to change your money. Like, for me, Revolut is just unbelievable. But for crypto, I really don't recommend it. So if anyone hasn't bought any crypto, you're watching, I just wouldn't recommend at all Revolut, because also the rates aren't good.
Oh no,
it's supposed to be. Yeah, they're terrible. It's supposed to be decent, but it's absolutely not.
Like I've seen like rates on Revolut that are a good 20% out of market. So yeah, I mean, but at the end of the day, the convenience is great, and I think it's, as a soft intro to crypto, it's been fantastic for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can't even lie. I think I bought. So I only got into crypto in 2018. So 2 years ago. And I think I bought my first lot of whatever. I think I bought some XRP and I bought some Bitcoin on Revolut back in the day. But I sold that, and then I went to Coinbase, and then I went to crypto.com. That was kind of and then Ledger and all that stuff. But so it was a soft intro. I think even my mum actually bought some money on Revolut, bought some Bitcoin on Revolut, but now I've got her on crypto.com, so it's all good. But I want to get your thoughts actually on privacy versus the possibility of criminal activity, because, you know, we can talk about taxes for a second. I think if privacy coins come in and it becomes mass adopted, people won't be paying taxes, from my standpoint. You know, like, I don't think anybody really pays taxes because they want to. I think everybody does it begrudgingly. Some people see the logic in it. But I don't think anybody's super happy to give to pay. I don't think anyone's like, yeah, take my 20K. Nobody's like that. So I imagine, you know, if we're dealing with privacy coins and you could get away with not paying taxes, I wonder, people would do that. So, and people would also do more criminal things. So do you think privacy sort of outweighs the possibility of illicit activity, you know, tax evasion, avoidance?
Sure, great questions. So I think the way I like to think of it is, let's take a typical person. You work for someone, and that company says, we can pay your salary in crypto, and you go, oh, that's great, fantastic, please pay my salary in Monero. And they go, no problem. They pay your salary, but they also have to report that you are an employee and this is the salary that they paid you. So the fact that you're being paid in Monero is great, because it means that you're able to you get that forward privacy, you know, and seeing what you're spending your money on and so on. You have the self-sovereignty. All of that's great, but it doesn't change your tax obligation.
Okay.
There's no like, you know, the tax man doesn't come to you and say like, well, your reporter says you're earning $10,000 a month, but since you don't have a bank account, we're just going to assume you earn zero. You know, they're going to go and like say, well, you know, this piece of paper or online thing says that you earn $10,000 a month. Come, give us our money. And for you to deny that, you're welcome to deny it, but now it's like your word versus your employer's. Of course, you know, like a company might choose to operate in cash, just, you know, and they might choose to operate in Monero, and then they can try and hide from the tax man. And there are lots of small businesses all around the world today that are cash-only businesses, especially in poorer countries, especially in like Africa and parts of Asia, and in fact even in you know, America and Europe. Cash-only businesses like food trucks, where, you know, a lot of them just simply do not report taxes. They operate in cash. They pay their bills in cash. They pay their staff in cash, and it's like this whole cash economy. But at the end of the day, there are controls around that, right? Because let's say that you have a food truck and you're operating this little cash-only business, and now you want to go buy a car. When you get to the dealer and you're like, here's my big bag of cash, that dealer's like, no, turn around, go to the bank and deposit it. And when you deposit it at the bank, the bank goes, oh, we're filing a suspicious activity report because you're depositing, $15,000 in cash. So
annoying.
the controls exist. The controls already exist for cash. Those same controls can exist for Monero. And yes, there might be small businesses that try and operate under the tax radar by using cash or by using Monero or by using both. And that is between them and the tax man. They run the risk of being caught and being fined heavily. And so that just doesn't seem advisable. And I don't think that the existence of Monero suddenly changes the fact that the taxman can figure out how much you earn in many instances just by doing a lifestyle audit. They pitch up and they see the giant house you live in and the 3 Ferraris. They're not going to believe your claim of only earning $2,000 a month.
I hear you. I really hear you. And I think that answers my next question, which was, because you sort of started off explaining, well, hang on, we know how much you earn because your company had to declare it, whatever. So we know Layah earns X because she works for this place and blah, blah, blah. Fine. So then I was thinking, well, hang on, what if I'm self-employed and I have my own company and so on, and then I start making all this money? But like you said, if you're living a lavish lifestyle or whatever you're doing, it's going to raise some suspicions. Even if you turn, say the car dealership. Well, so you're saying if there's a car, so say we have Monero mass adoption, I want to go buy a Lambo. I don't like Lambos, but let's just do it for the sake of crypto, Say I want to go buy a Lambo with my Monero. You're telling me that the car dealership would say, okay, cool, happy to accept your Monero. But they would be a bit, well, hang on, no, they won't be suspicious of it. How would they know that I haven't paid tax on my Monero?
No, so they wouldn't be suspicious, but they might, at least initially, there might be some sort of safeguards, like they need to ask you for proof of funds. Or source of funds, sorry, not proof of funds. So source of funds is a thing that happens. It's an anti-money laundering thing that happens. I'm sure you've seen people complain about it. They deposit funds on an exchange. They deposit crypto on an exchange, and the exchange says, "Listen, we've frozen your account. You need to provide source of funds." And it's happened to me in the past. It's happened to a lot of people, and oftentimes it's just as simple as an email to say, "I got this by mining," or whatever. And sometimes they might dig in and they might say, we need a little bit, can you provide receipts to show the mining equipment you bought? And yes, absolutely, I can. I know it bothers you, but at the end of the day, like, the point I'm trying to make is a lot of these AML safeguards exist because of cash. And privacy enhancing currencies like Monero are just a digital analog or digital equivalent of cash. So the same safeguards that exist for cash exist for Monero. They're already there. The people know, companies and financial institutions know how to handle cash, so they actually do know how to handle Monero. And yes, in a world where Monero or privacy enhanced, some other privacy enhancing currency is widely adopted or broadly adopted, could some of those safeguards change? Absolutely. They could change either way. They could become more stringent or less stringent. But at the end of the day, those safeguards that exist for cash right now could be used immediately and are used often for cryptocurrency in general, not even for privacy enhancing cryptocurrencies.
That's really interesting. That didn't occur to me in the slightest. So that's really cool to hear. I think a lot of people sort of have this idea that, in a world of privacy coins, everything is just free and we can do what we want. Utopian delusion?
Yeah, totally. Because if you think about it, when did computerized bank accounts really start to come into existence? 60s and 70s? So prior to that, it was a world of cash and checks. Remember checks? And if you think about it, like, for the past few hundred years, only the past 50 years have we really had this, like, everything is on the computer and all your financial information is flowing on the computer. Like, prior to that, it was just a world of cash and IOUs and so on. Now, think about how law enforcement used to operate at the turn of the century. If they thought someone was laundering money or doing something illegal, they would actually have to go and investigate the person. And there were numerous ways for them to do that. And I think what's happened is, with the computerization of money, law enforcement's almost gotten a little bit lazy because they go like, oh, well,
Oh, I see.
we'll just rely on the banks to tell us when something
Right.
suspicious is happening. But I mean, you walk into a bank, is the average bank teller has certainly not had any law enforcement training. They have no
Or
idea.
much bank training either.
Yeah, well, you're lucky if they can even process your transactions. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I mean the total lack of formal law enforcement training in the financial sector is frightening, and yet those are the people who are expected to file suspicious activity reports.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of worrying, but I do think again it's an overcorrection. Law enforcement have gone
Yes, I was
from
gonna say.
we know how to deal with cash to everything's computerized, so we can just sit back and let the banks handle it.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
interesting.
hopefully
And
that pendulum swings back. Hopefully it swings back if there is mass adoption of cryptocurrencies.
yeah, I think that's really interesting to think this overcorrection, because it's sort of, we're moving forward in terms of technology, and yet in some ways, in terms of you can let's call it regulation or laws or whatever, legislation, we're sort of reverting back in some ways, because it's the same kind of methodology, I guess, that would be required for things like cash back in the day,
100%.
back in the 60s. Cool. So we are approaching 45 minutes. So I want to get you to give us a final closing overall, whatever. So I'm going to put you on full screen. It's super complicated. That was super easy. All right. Give us your final words.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess final words are it's 2020. If you survive this year, and I hope that you do, I hope that I do too, it's time to take back our privacy. And I know that is really daunting. And I've been saying this over the past little while, and I'm going to repeat it on this show. Take back your privacy one step at a time. Start with one service that you use and switch to a privacy enhancing service. If you use Gmail for email, switch to Proton Mail or Tutanota or some other privacy enhancing email service. You don't have to get rid of your Gmail. You can still use Google Docs. You can still use all of those other services, but just switch one thing and try it for 6 months. And then after 6 months, switch something else. So you use Facebook, great. Switch that off. Delete your Facebook account and start to use some other service. Or maybe, pick up the phone and speak to your friends and family members. And if you can just every 6 months reclaim your privacy by dropping one service and using a different service, or dropping one app and using a different app that actually respects your privacy, you will find that within a few years, you have just unleashed yourself from the system that pays, where you're the product, and you've gotten into a system where you're no longer the product, where they work for you, where they defend and protect your security and privacy. And that is definitely a world that I want to live in, not a world where we give up all privacy like we're in the middle of George Orwell's 1984.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. I totally agree with you. And I also agree with you. Turn off your socials. Just pick up the phone and speak to a friend. If you do anything this weekend, speak to a friend. Pick up the phone.
Yeah.
All right, Fluffy Pony, Riccardo, I want to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on. I want to thank Icon Plus for powering it and BlockFi for sponsoring it. So, guys, I also think don't forget, you can get $25. I've put the link somewhere. You can find it. Grab your money. All right, cool. End the broadcast now. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.